The official start. Welcome everybody. It's lovely to see you, snow or absence of snow. It's going to be a good time here, I know, with both our excellent speakers that we've got this afternoon. Really so nice to see so many old friends and new friends and people who aren't friends yet, but we'll hope one day we'll get to meet you. Fine, so we're not going to delay by too much chat. A reminder that the next meeting that we're having, I'll say it again at the end, but the next TSF meeting is on the 12th of December, when it'll be a seasonal one. I know Steve and Martin have been cooking up some good things. And then, of course, after that, the next meeting will be in January. So we'll hope to see as many of you as we can in December. So this afternoon, we have two very excellent speakers. I'm looking forward to both of these presentations on subjects that I know is going to be of interest to a lot of people. So Mary is going to go off first with her hunting songs of the Lakeland fell packs. And Mary, I know that you're ready to go. Mary's going to be speaking for about half an hour, and then after that there will be time to bring questions for her to think about and give us some thoughts on. So Mary, if you'd like to go.
Yep, okay, I'll get my PowerPoint going. There you go. Yeah, let's go from the beginning. Right. That working? We good?
Yep, that looks good.
Perfect. All right. I'm going to read off my page so I don't waffle on too long. So forgive me for that. Okay, here we go. So I thought I'd just start today by explaining how I came to research Lakeland hunting songs in the first place, as it's something I'm often asked, and it might help better situate the rest of what I'm going to talk to you about this afternoon. So I grew up on a hill farm on the edge of Yorkshire, the Yorkshire Dales. This is our old farmhouse and a view of Gregoreth, our fell land behind the house there. The farm was sold earlier this year, but that was my home for the last 30 years and a bit. So yeah, that's home. And so I went off to the University of York in 2009 with the intention of studying chemistry. Fast forward a couple of months and I found myself transferring onto the music degree. Long story, but I thought I'd be able to get a proper job if I wasn't faffing around with music. I'm primarily a classical singer with particular interest in early vocal music, but I also play and now teach piano and double bass. Folk had never really crossed my radar apart from some off-comedens coming into primary school in questionable knitwear, trying to convince us to learn some obscure tunes or songs that seemed to have very little relevance to us. But I'm a real homebody, and in 2011, when it came round to choosing what to study for my undergraduate dissertation, I decided to look into music from home, whatever that might be. A small part of that work was attending a Lakeland hunt song night. Steve Gardiner and John Greaves had half suggested that Lakeland hunting songs were vaguely from my neck of the woods, so it might be worth looking into, and put me in touch with Sue Allen. Sue had had it on fairly good authority that not much singing was happening anymore, but it might be worth an ask if I could find a way in. As chance would have it, the Loonsdale pack, one of the 6 Lakeland fell packs, have permission to go over our family farm's land if they're ever out in the area. So we receive the hunt meet card every year, but we've never been hunting ourselves. I rang up their hunt secretary and left a voicemail explaining who I was, where I was from, and asking if they ever did any singing anymore. And if so, could I go along and listen or record some? A couple of weeks went by where I guess my credentials and family ties were checked out properly, and I received a phone call from the secretary saying they were having a sing-song that weekend if I wanted to go along, and it was fine to take a recording device. So off I trekked to Crosby Ravensworth with my dad and spent the night in the butcher's arms, drinking rather good beer and indulging in a tatey pot supper. I recorded 23 songs that night and came home with a brace of pheasants that I won in the raffle. It struck me that if I could record 23 songs in just one night, and there were 5 other fell packs that I could work with, then this was surely a tradition worth exploring a bit more. And so 10 years and a PhD later, here I am still fascinated by hunting songs. Let's just get this to, there we go. So the singing tradition I've been studying is attached to what are known as the Lakeland fell packs. The fell part of this term refers to the Northern English term for a big hill or a mountain, whereas the Lakeland in question is generally understood nowadays to be located in the modern English county of Cumbria. But the hunts do sometimes cross the border into North Yorkshire, like my family's farm, County Durham and the Scottish borders. My family farm, if you see on that map right down in the bottom right, I think you can just about make out Ingleton and Ingleborough. And my family farm is somewhere between there and Kirby Lonsdale. Many of you will be familiar with the Lake District National Park, which is highlighted on this map, sort of in the green on the left-hand side. It's not Lakeland, the Lake District isn't necessarily the same as Lakeland, but people disagree, and yeah, the Lakeland bit is a bit woolly. Anyway, there is at least consensus about which packs are the Lakeland ones, and these are, in the order I collected them, material from them, are the Lunesdale foxhounds, the Blencathra foxhounds, the Ullswater foxhounds, the Eskdale and Ennerdale foxhounds, the Coniston foxhounds, and the Melbrack foxhounds. And the areas they typically cover can be seen on these two maps here. I'm not sure how clear the one on the left is for you all, but hopefully gives you a bit of an idea. I think I should just quickly explain so these are the areas they now cover. But of course, since the 2005 hunting ban with hunting with dogs, they now aren't hunting foxes anymore as they would have done traditionally. They typically engage with drag hunting, which is where they'll leave an aniseed trail, which is either done by someone running around with it tied to their waist, or they'll tie it to the back of a quad bike and pull it around, and then the hounds will follow that. So that's what they usually get up to now. So the three things these packs appear to have in common and make them Lakeland fell packs are the terrain they cover, the hounds with which they hunt, which are considered to be lighter and more agile than hounds associated with mounted packs, and their collective singing tradition. Lakeland hunting is considerably different from most people's perceptions of fox hunting and is often described as hunting the hard way. The landscape is extremely mountainous and craggy, but also really wet all the time, hence the lakes. It is because of the difficult terrain that the Lakeland fell packs are not mounted. So in other words, there are no horses involved and no fanaring, and people who follow the hunts do so on foot, or at least as best they can in a car. Lakeland hunting is also not considered to be an elitist activity, and in general, the people involved with the hunts are not particularly wealthy. It's just your normal working local people from the area who tend to be involved. So yes, I'll just give you a bit of an idea. So in my sort of abstract for the talk, I said I'd talk about the history, but a more accurate way of describing that is probably sort of the transformations that the tradition has seen from, how things maybe were, 50, 60 years ago to how they are now. So I'll talk to you a little bit about that. So it's in part due to the more working class nature of these hunts that the singing tradition has endured. The two main functions of the singing tradition are as entertainment for these isolated rural communities and for fundraising purposes. Without the need to constantly fundraise to provide for the hunt staff and the hounds, there would arguably be little need for the singing tradition to continue in the way that it has. The packs themselves came about primarily as a form of pest control, with the first recognisable Lakeland fell pack, the Coniston foxhounds, forming in 1825. Before then, there were trencher-fed packs where each farmer would keep a couple of hounds and they would be gathered together informally to deal with a pest problem whenever it arose. But this was not particularly efficient, and so money started to be raised to found more organised packs. Members of the hunting community believe the singing tradition arose as a natural progression from the singing that took place at shepherds' meets, You'll have to ask me afterwards if you want to know more about them. And there seems always to have been a link between the social side of hunting and singing in particular, and fundraising for the hunts. The songs and their singing reinforce the community's identity, as the majority of the songs tell a story and immortalise particularly epic days out hunting, great characters and beloved animals. These songs were created for and to be all about a certain community, and they provide an important social and oral history of these areas of Cumbria. There's a whole section of my thesis based on interviews I did with members of the hunt, which outlines the ways in which the singing tradition has changed from something that everyone used to do to a state in where many of those involved are a bit worried about its continuation. Many of the causes and consequences are interlinked, and I'll do my best to quickly summarise some of these. I don't know if many of you may be watching Simon Reeve's documentary about the lakes at the moment, but if you are, much of what he's been talking about and problems and changes seen in the lakes echo much of what I found in my interview responses. One of the greatest changes to the singing tradition has been through the cessation of the peripatetic practice, where the hunts move around their territories, staying in a certain village or valley for a week at a time. For as long as this was a common practice, hunting songs were sung on several nights per week, and whole communities were involved in the social side of hunting. When this ended, an important binding force was removed. The practice stopped mainly due to improvements in transport, which made it possible and easier to return the hounds to the kennels every day after hunting. Improvements in transport have had a multifaceted effect on the singing tradition. Because more people started to own their own vehicles, attending hunts that weren't just in your own valley became possible, as did the associated social occasions. But as people became more reliant on cars and less used to walking, the drink driving ban then had a significant effect on the singing tradition, as singing nights wouldn't always be at your local pub or village hall. As people were able to move around more easily, they were also able to diversify their interests. This is also linked to changes in employment, particularly farming, and thus to changes in the type of people living in these communities. As young people have chosen or been forced to move away, many of the old characters, those who traditionally organised the sing-songs, also started dying off. Farms were once very much part of the hunting community and provided the network of accommodation and animal feed required for the hunts to regularly move around the region. Farm workers also regularly attended social hunting occasions as one of their main sources of evening entertainment. But as farms became more mechanised and employment of farmlands generally ended, the countryside population began to change. At the same time, those who remained in the area, particularly those on farms, became less associated with hunting because the hunts no longer stayed regularly in their areas. All these changes also had economic consequences, which have likewise affected the hunting song tradition. People moved away from a largely self-sufficient lifestyle and started to have disposable income. This facilitated the purchase of cars and so widened the variety of leisure activities available. People had much wider choice of things to do and places to go, and so attending hunt song nights was no longer the only entertainment option. What may have initially seemed like economic freedom, however, is now felt to have gone too far, in that attending social evenings has started to become prohibitively expensive now that everything has to be paid for, so things like taxis, drinks, food, raffles, etc. There's also been a correlated change in the population of these communities. Many of the people I talked to spoke of a change from knowing everyone in the village to knowing hardly anyone at all. This is caused mainly by two factors: changes in the availability and location of jobs and the increasing number of second homes in the area. Traditional work like farming and mining has become less available, while more well-paid work became available either in other places in Cumbria, usually around the edges of the county, or elsewhere in the country. Much of the work available in what had been traditional communities became associated with the tourist trade and is often seasonal. This then makes it difficult, particularly for young people, to afford to live in the lakes, and that's exacerbated by the inflated house prices caused by the increased use of properties as second homes or holiday accommodation. The increasing number of tourists has also had an impact on the singing tradition, perhaps most noticeably through the changes seen in the region's pubs. Pubs have moved towards prioritising spaces for dining and have turned function rooms that may once have been used for hunt socials into extra accommodation for tourists. The overall result of all this is a shift in the frequency of social hunting occasions, Where these formerly took place several times a week, now they happen in the best cases a couple of times a month. All this is part of the wider changes that affect these communities: fewer permanent residents, an ageing population, a disconnect between the hunt and the community, and a greater choice in leisure activities. Because song nights have been taking place less and less frequently, problems have also arisen with the preservation of repertoire, and there is growing sense that singing hunting songs is not really considered to be an everyday activity anymore. Two other countrywide influences on the singing tradition have been the hunting ban and the outbreak of foot and mouth disease. Perhaps surprisingly to some, one of the effects of the hunting ban seems to have been to galvanise people's efforts to keep the tradition going, though this has also been noted by Ian Russell in relation to the Pennine Packs. But because of the changes in population in the countryside and the increasing numbers of tourists, some singers are concerned about potential confrontations about the ethics of hunting by singing in mixed company. This is of particular concern to older people. The foot and mouth outbreak also likely had an effect, as it changed for quite some time the ways in which people interacted with the countryside, particularly those from farming backgrounds. So although no one thought the future of the tradition was entirely secure, there was some hope displayed amongst those I spoke to. Most noticed specifically the small increase in participation by young people and those new to the area in more recent years. Why this interest amongst these two groups has arisen now is interesting. Some of it would seem to be a show of defiance against the hunting ban. It could also be the case that younger people, aware that rents are becoming increasingly expensive, are choosing to live at home with their parents for longer. So getting involved with the social side of hunting is still one of the most available local leisure activities for them. This increased interest could also signal an attempt by young people and newcomers to create a greater sense of community in their areas. I'm also interested in the correlation between the date when I started my research and this perceived resurgence in interest in the tradition. I first started researching Lakeland hunting songs in 2011, and until around the time I was conducting my interviews in 2016, there did not seem to have been much by way of attempts to reinvigorate the singing tradition. So I have to wonder whether by starting to ask questions about it, I have inadvertently sparked a mini revival of the tradition. One respondent said to me, "Until you started asking questions, you don't think about it, do you?" And perhaps just that someone was starting to ask such questions caused those involved in the tradition to start to take action to preserve their heritage. Whether this is actually the case, let alone whether this has been undertaken consciously or deliberately, is very difficult for me to gauge, but it does seem like there could be a possibility. There seems to be some hope for the future of the tradition, but the way in which it might continue may well be very different from how it existed in the past. But this is arguably all part and parcel of what makes a vibrant and living tradition. Perhaps by embracing this concept, the tradition could flourish once again in the future. So let's have a little look at texts of these songs. So much of what there is to note about the text of Lakeland hunting songs, I'll actually be covering in my talk for the Broadside Day. So go and get your tickets for that, everyone. But to give you some context here today, this is seemingly very much a text-based song tradition, and new songs will generally be composed via pen and paper, most often with a tune in mind. The literacy rate in Cumbria, or Westmoreland and Cumberland as they once were, has historically been way above the national average, and all levels of Cumbrian society have generally been literate. Despite being hill farmers through and through, my paternal grandfather was encouraged to receive all his schooling and went to the local grammar school just over the border in Kirkby Lonsdale, and where I eventually went to secondary school, though it's comprehensive nowadays. My maternal grandfather over in Yorkshire, on the other hand, also a farmer, was made to leave school at 13 to go to work full time. My point being that since the inception of the singing tradition, the majority of those will have been literate, so it's not really surprising that song lyrics tend to be disseminated via the written page. Most of the song texts in my possession come from local publications such as these, so biographies of huntsmen and the Songs of the Fell Pack book, which was published by the Melbrook Foxhounds in the 1970s. All words have been given to me by members of the singing tradition, either on paper or via email. Where there is evidence for transmission, though, is in the singing of choruses and the transmissions of tunes, which I'll come on to shortly. Like many local song-making traditions, the texts of these songs are often specific to the area in which they are composed and will reference primarily local people and places. But I wouldn't say that these make the songs inaccessible to outsiders. I'm not from Cumbria, and yes, I know I'm from nearby, but when I first started attending song nights, I didn't have the extensive geographical knowledge to necessarily get all of these songs. But that has never once detracted from my enjoyment of them. The main purpose of these songs is to entertain, so they can be enjoyed on several levels. More often than not, the very local songs are really funny, and yes, you'll possibly enjoy them more on a deeper level if you get all the references, but even the beginner listener can get some enjoyment from them. So let's have a quick look at one. This is JCB's song, written by Tom Jackson in the 1980s, and I think this is kind of a prime example of this. Let me see if I can remember the tune and I'll sing it to you. Okay, so now there's this man O'Malley, he's a man of high renown, and he has a plantai business quite close to Penrith town. He hires out his dumpers and the shovels there for free, but the pride of his possession is that yellow JCB. And he takes it into Penrith and he hides it out at night, and the engine runs on diesel as it paddles through the shite, and he takes it with him hunting, but only for the crack. Pat O'Malley at the steering wheel and Thomas in the back. Anyway, you get the idea. So when I first started going to hunt song nights, I had no idea who Pat O'Malley or Thomas were, and I don't think that it really mattered at all. It's just a silly song. I haven't been able to ascertain the tune name for this song, but if anyone happens to know what it is, then please let me know. This is also a prime example of a Lakeland hunting song, which isn't really about hunting at all. It references hunting, and the O'Malleys are keen hunt followers. In fact, Thomas O'Malley, who's Pat O'Malley's son, is, I think, currently one of the joint masters of the Ullswater foxhounds. But it's perhaps not what you might imagine a hunting song to be. There are plenty of those too. Of the 313 songs I covered in my thesis, 43% are directly about hunting, but 57% are not. The songs that aren't directly about hunting are generally tributes to huntsmen, general local songs just about people and places connected to Lakeland singing tradition, tributes to animals, mainly dogs, but sometimes foxes and horses, and then either songs which outright protest the hunting ban, or else are recollections of how hunting used to be in the good old days. So yes, I said I'd talk about tunes a bit. So the tunes of this tradition, before I wrap things up, for the 313 songs in the collection studies as part of my thesis, I found approximately 147 tunes. These are tunes I have either heard performed, have been told what the tune should be, what tune should be used by informants, or are noted in a textual source. I use the word approximately in relation to the numbers of tunes in that collection because I'm aware that with further scholarship, this number will likely change. This is because I might have heard only snippets of a song due to performer's lapse of memory, or the singer might have been too drunk to produce a distinctive tune. Most of the uncertainties arise from tunes used by the Country Voices project, which is too involved to try and explain my way through just now, but basically they produced some commercial recordings of hunting songs, and they were probably trying to get around some copyright laws. And so they slightly altered tunes for that purpose. These 147 tunes correspond with approximately 189 of the 313 songs. So again, I use the word approximately because in a handful of cases, it is difficult to be entirely sure if a song uses a particular tune. This is sometimes because a textual source indicates a particular tune to use, but I've then heard the same song performed with a different tune. This slipperiness when it comes to tunes used absolutely typifies the attitude of many within the tradition. It doesn't really matter which tune is used for a particular song, just as long as it's sung. As a result, I decided not to spend too much time identifying tunes and their names because it doesn't seem to be a great concern within this tradition. But just to give you a flavour of the sort of tunes they're using, here are the top 10. So just to explain this table, we've got tune name on the left. Then we've got the number of songs that I've heard using this tune. And then we've got songs which probably use the tune. And I've done that through sort of various bits of analysis, which I'll explain in a second. And then we've got total. So the analysis here is mainly from looking at the text of the songs and making an informed guess as to which tune it probably goes with. More often than not, this can be determined just by looking at the chorus. So if it goes tally ho, hark forward, good hounds, tally ho, you know it's probably going to have the tune hark forward, good hounds, tally ho. But sometimes this is also known in the tradition as the 6 fell packs, as it's most often associated with a song. So why these tunes? Most of these tunes are used time and again because they have good choruses and they're relatively malleable. This is especially the case in Hark Forward, and I did this general transcription for my thesis, where you can hopefully get an idea of how much this tune can be pulled around. So wherever I've got the crosshead notes, you can basically whack in whatever rhythm and sort of vague notes you like, and it'll still sort of work. And then the ossia staves give sort of really common variations of the tune. So you know, the chorus is fairly static, and that starts, where does it start? So where there's the C ossia, and so the second bar on the bottom stave, on the E and the F sharp, that's kind of where the chorus starts. And that's fairly consistent throughout versions, but ish, it depends how much drink has been had. And then the rest you can kind of do what you like with. So it's a really useful tune and you can essentially do what you like with it. But there's very little knowledge within the Lakeland hunting song community about tunes. I don't think I've ever been told a tune name by a singer. Usually they'd just tell me another song that shares the same tune. So where are they getting these tunes? This is a bit I did on tune sources. So again, I've tried to do a bit of analysis and I came up with this table, and this is primarily conjecture. It is my feelings about where members of the hunting song community most likely got these tunes. So hunting songs, the category there includes like your hark forwards, but also things like Dido Bendigo, songs that have a chorus which remains unchanged between songs and directly relates to hunting. So any song like that would end up in this category. It's those sort of things. It might also seem strange to see a group like the Dubliners et al. With their own category when there's also a Scots and Irish songs category. But this is because when I've asked what a tune is, I'll have been told it's a Dubliners song, for example. So the tune Fathom the Bowl is used for the song The North Lonsdale Foxhounds, but it seems unlikely to me that anyone is going to think of that tune as a 19th century drinking song. They'll almost certainly think of it as a song by the Watersons, so it's that kind of thing. The Johnny Cash category is quite an interesting one. Cash was evidently very popular amongst members of the hunting community, and there were actually one or two other tunes that almost made it into that category. One tune that did make it in is A Rugged Old Cross, which many of you may think of as a hymn tune. But the singer who I heard perform The Cunning Old Fox, this song here, told me that it's a Johnny Cash song. And so there we are. Just in case anyone doesn't know it, I'll give you a little blast of this. So I'm going to start. On a hill over there stands a cunning old fox, his tail's hanging low in the breeze. We have hunted that fox on many a day. With his cunning, those hounds they would tease. And we've hunted that cunning old fox till those hounds they were weary and lame. We will look for that cunning old fox and we'll hunt him again and again. Where was I? Okay, so the tunes used in this tradition are reminiscent of many local song making traditions. They're just recycling tunes that people have heard and enjoyed, but they will also be popular with their audiences, and this is particularly in the case of choruses. So just to finish, I've probably talked for long enough, and I'm still growing my collection of Lakeland hunting songs. People are still passing them on to me, and though I haven't counted exactly recently, I think I've got about 350 songs in my collection now. and there are almost certainly more out there. They're really interesting songs, and I hope more people can get as excited about this tradition as I do. I get that the ethics of hunting may put some people off, but there are questionable histories to all sorts of folk song traditions, but we don't just dismiss them as unworthy of study. You don't need to endorse hunting to be able to value these songs as socio-cultural artifacts. The songs cover all sorts of topics, and while many are written just to be funny, some are hauntingly beautiful, particularly the ones just about the Cumbrian landscape. There's this wealth of repertoire belonging to a real living folk tradition, and no one is singing it apart from members of that tradition, which to me just seems ridiculous. So let's not dismiss hunting songs as boring lists of people and places you've never heard of. There's much more to them than that. So let's just finish off with a blast of the Mardale hunting song, which I think was recorded sometime in the 70s, but you watch this and this is basically what hunting songs are still like nowadays. You know, it's only the dress code that's slightly changed. Here we go.
The Mardle pack is on the tail, away, away. The fox is following up the dale, away, me lads, away. Hound millers on the scent I'm told, so footed lads through frost and cold, that mountain breeze is pure as gold, away, lads, away. On Bransty Fell that fox is seen, away, away. The hounds are off the scent is keen, away, me lads, away. 'Tis music sweet to dalesmen's ear when hounds give out so loud and clear. So off me lads and lend a cheer. Away, lads, away. Now who'd weary with a sport like this? Away, away. But who a Mardle hunt would miss? Away, me lads, away. The hardy fellsman hunters born will very tarry on huntsman's horn, nor heeded be by rain or storm. Away! Now in winter darkness draws to Mardle high, away, away, for who the Dunbull dare decry, away, me lads, away. Follow your guides, you'll find a bed to rest our limbs and lay our head. We're welcomed, warmed and housed and fed, away, me lads, away. Now in winter Mardle's free and clear, away, away. Oh, we say she loves.
Ooh, sorry. There we go. Oh, there we go. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you so much, Mary. That was absolutely wonderful, and there'll be applause rocketing around this this meeting. That was really excellent. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Just in your half an hour, such a broad scope of information and wonderful photographs too. I really enjoyed those. So thank you for all your work, your research that's obviously taken up much of your life. But anyway, in spite of not being able to get together, you can feel the enthusiasm that's coming from people in the chat too. And we have a couple of questions up already. I would remind folks that they can raise your virtual hand by going to reactions, which is at the bottom bit of your screen, and then clicking on raise hand, and then you can lower it after you've asked your question. So first of all, we have Abby, if you'd like to unmute yourself and put your question.
Not so much a question. Terrific talk. I'm fascinated by this and your entry over time into the area is legitimate. I had been aware of the Hash House Harriers, which is pretty much still international and traditionally specialized in bawdy songs when they got to the pub, and their goal was to get drunk and sing dirty songs. But the concept of drag hunting, I did not ever realize was a whole different way of doing things and many variations in Britain. And I just did a quick look at Wikipedia and Google to find out that there are many variations on this. And I just wanted to say, it's a whole new area. I'm fascinated by it. Thank you very much.
Oh, good. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Thank you, Abby. Maggie Coulthard, if you'd like to come next.
Hi. Thank you ever so much for that, Mary. It was fantastic, especially the Mardale singing because my dad is in it. And he's going to be 94 next week. So I shall go and tell him that I've been watching him on Zoom. He'd be delighted. He's still in Penrith. And I sent some messages.
Is that Tommy?
Yeah, that's my dad.
Yeah. He did some of my interviews for me. So send him my best wishes. He's lovely.
I will. And I just sent a message to Sue as well, because there's a beautiful song by Dick Gargett, which is a tour of the Lake District in song, in dialect, and it's fantastic and funny. And if you're still collecting, you know, you'd be delighted by that one, I'm sure. But thank you ever so much. I've had such a nice time, because my dad has always followed the hunt. And one of the social things that I'm sure you know about, when he was young, because he was a farm labourer, were hunt balls. So a lot of the social life in the 50s, especially, and maybe before, was around hunt balls, and they would kind of go different villages, and it was all part of the same network and part of the same kind of activity. But thank you ever so much. I've had a fantastic time. It's great.
Thank you, Maggie. Yes, I enjoyed seeing your comments on the chat. Katie, you have a hand up.
Yeah, for everybody else who doesn't know yet, there's going to be a link into the talk I'm doing in a few minutes. So it was really interesting to hear all this, and so great to hear about a living tradition, because you know mine's a historical one, so many of our talks are, so that was great. Just have a quick factual question, which maybe you don't know the answer, I don't know, but there's a photograph of them singing in a pub, Mary, and I wondered if you knew where the pub was or who the participants were.
I don't know for sure. All that I know is that it's I think it's somewhere in Ambleside, and I know it's people to do with the Coniston foxhounds, and it was sometime in the 50s or 60s, but otherwise don't know, I'm afraid.
Okay, perhaps we might get a bit of I mean, I haven't seen that before. Was that a private photograph, or is it public?
It's on so on the Lakeland Hunting Memories website. I've nicked it off there.
Thank you.
Thank you. So do we have any more questions from our listeners, please? I was just wondering, Mary, I've always been interested in the names that appear of the dogs in some of the hunting songs. Are they as imaginative up in the fell packs?
Yes, and there's I mean, it's something I need to find out a bit more about, but they tend to use that, you know, they recycle names, and there's sort of there's very traditional names. So, you know, the songs that you might get in your, you know, hunting songs from, I don't know, 17th or 18th century will still be used now. You know, get them, and then, you know, they just use them over and over again, and it's to do with the breeding lines as well, I believe. So, you know, a particular hound will be called after its parentage and that kind of thing. Yes, they've got good names, and but yeah, the dogs they use are very distinctive as well, and like the terrier, not just the hounds, it's the terriers as well. Like I quite would like a Patterdale Terrier because they're very nice little doggies, but anyway.
Another time maybe. Well, that was so interesting. Thank you. That's obviously sparked lots of thoughts and lots of reactions. So thank you very much for presenting to us this afternoon. And we'll move on to our next speaker, who is Katie Howson, somebody well known to a lot of us here. And Katie, I had a quick look at your BBC Genome archive. It's absolutely fascinating. There's so much stuff. I was, you know, searching after something that I remembered and think, oh yes, it was about 20 years ago that I heard that programme. So that was very revealing. So you've been looking at well, the things to do with folk song and a particular one. So if you'd like to go for us now, Katie, thanks.
Right, just let me know if you can see anything.
Yes, that's looking good.
I just can't get to the bit I want. There's something in the way. Can't move it out of the way. How do I get to it?
It's all right. Take your time.
Well, There's always something, isn't there, to challenge you on these things. This
I
is not
know.
a problem I've ever had before, but suddenly I can't get to the bit where I want to put the slideshow up because there's something.
Well,
Yeah, it's all right, found it.
good. Well done.
Here we go.
Okay, thank you.
Right, should have full screen view now. Yep.
No.
Not yet.
There's something going on here that I don't like. I don't know what's going on.
Try going out and coming back in again
Yeah.
and check you're selecting the right screen, Katie. It's the
Yeah, we'll do.
problem we had the other day.
We did. Oh, okay. For some reason I've got it open twice, so I'm going to have to work out which one it is.
It's the other one.
It's the other one. I don't know which one that was. That's the problem. How's that?
Oh, you've made
That's
it.
it.
That's it. Brilliant.
Good. Okay. So the title of this talk is Thirsty Work, Researching Folk Song in the BBC Radio Times Genome Archive. And first of all, for those of you outside Britain, you need to know that the Radio Times is a weekly publication which started in 1923 and gives a schedule for all the BBC broadcasts for the week ahead. And more than BBC these days, but obviously in the early days it was just BBC. I wanted to check the timing of a 1939 programme of songs from the Eel's Foot pub in Suffolk. So I went to the Radio Times online archive, Genome, typed the pub's name into the search box, and lo and behold, up came a programme I'd never heard of, called Thirsty Work, from 1940. Even more of a surprise was to find that this was actually the third in a series of 7 programmes of pub singing from across rural England, which were broadcast between 9th of April 1940 and the 7th of March 1941. Part of the aim of this talk is to prompt you, and obviously it's already prompted Sian to have a look, that's great, to have a look at the Radio Times Genome Archive itself. I think perhaps it's overlooked by folk researchers because it doesn't have any audio files to go with the documentation. However, for those of us interested in the social history of folk music, and in this case the way that pub sessions worked or were perceived to work, it has some items of real value. I'm going to give you a brief guided tour around this particular series, and there are more details about each programme up on my website, Unsung Histories, if you wish to find out more. There's a link at the end of the slideshow to that. So this piece of research has been quite different to some projects because it started with documentary evidence which didn't even mention the word folk song or traditional. So in the early days, I wasn't even sure if this was the kind of song which was featured in these programmes, but it was. Now I can't get the next slide up, sorry. Oh. I'm going to have to do this again because
Try clicking your mouse on the slide before you press the down button.
Okay, right, yeah. Have you got the next slide?
Yes.
All right, okay. So the Thirsty Work series was broadcast on the BBC Forces programme, which had started transmissions just a few weeks earlier, and which became very popular with civilian listeners as well as the intended audience of troops serving abroad. These programmes were recorded in a BBC mobile recording unit. This consisted of 1 or 2 engineers working in the back of a converted laundry or furniture van using recording machines which made direct cut acetate discs there and then. Each double-sided disc had, I think, about 4 to 5 minutes recording time per side, requiring careful management of the proceedings in the pub in this case. The songs were recorded and then a commentary was added live in the studio at the time of broadcast. There are BBC acetate discs for the first 2 Thirsty Work programmes in the British Library Sound Archive, although they're not identified as being radio broadcasts and they're not available to listen to online. So here we go, visiting pubs in Westmoreland, Yorkshire, Suffolk, Northamptonshire, Worcestershire and Gloucestershire. And in a neat and totally unplanned segue from Mary's talk, the first pub is from the Lake District and features hunting songs. This programme was recorded in the Royal Oak in Ambleside and broadcast on the 9th of April 1940. The Radio Times had this to say about the first in the series. Maurice Brown, producer, has made a great study of the songs they sing in the village inn. Many will remember his rousing programme at the Eel's Foot. He has set out in this new series to reproduce the voice of the taproom in song, and he's making a start with Northern England. Typical songs of the Lake District and the Yorkshire Dales will be heard in this opening programme. Now, in fact, the Yorkshire singers were featured in the second programme a month later. So from this first programme, 4 songs and some speech are preserved on the BBC discs in the British Library. So from that, we know what the songs sung on this occasion were. Of course, they had to have John Peel, Joe Bowman, which was probably sung by the chap in the picture here, Break Black, Sally Gray, which was sung by Alfred Creighton, and All Jolly Fellows. None of those singers are identified in the British Library catalogue. Bright Black, full name Braithwaite Black, would appear to have been at the centre of this occasion, as he was also recorded talking about legendary Lakeland hunter Joe Bowman, who had actually died just 3 weeks before this recording. And Black was clearly a larger-than-life character himself. When he worked in the slate quarries, and when he died in 1944, the Westmoreland Gazette published a long obituary describing him as a respected mountain guide, a terrier breeder, a hound trailer, an athlete, a rugby player, and member of a male voice choir. And now, thanks to Sue Allen and Paul Adams, and with the grace of God, we'll have a listen to something which is from a recording made in 1940 for this radio programme. It's just a snippet of Break Black singing Joe Bowman. The song runs over 5 minutes long and so had to be recorded on 2 sides of a disc and edited together later. The break in recording is quite clear as the singer changes pitch and the acoustics are quite different after the 4th chorus. This is the beginning of the song. These may be a little quiet, I apologise if they are. They may be very quiet. Joe, I've had this up and working. I've practiced it on whatever on Zoom, and everything was working perfectly. And now there's no sound, is there? Oh. Right. Moving on. That's a real shame. I'm sorry we can't get to hear these. Maybe one of the other ones will.
We might need to share sound separately.
Sorry?
Down at Howson we met with Joe Bowman at dawn. The grey hills echoed back the glad sound of his horn. The charm of his note sent the mist far away, and a puff from his blare at the dawn of the day. When the iron of the house and gold about will ring to the bar and his own walk around. Oh, we never forget how we walk across the door with the crack of his whip and the sound.
Oh dear, I don't know what's going on. Did somebody have some advice for me about the sound? Was it Richard? Did you have some advice about the sound?
All I said was that you might need to share sound, but it sounds like you managed to do that bit.
Yeah, there's a blip here. I'm sorry, but we'll plod on. Hopefully the sound gods will work with us. So yeah, thanks to Sue Allen and to Paul Adams for that snip, which is, I say, actually one of the ones that was recorded for this radio programme. Alfred Creighton is the other singer who can be identified from the recordings because the audience can be heard calling him by name both before and after singing Sally Gray. And this song was written by the Cumberland bard Robert Anderson in 1802. And in fact, Sue Allen played this very recording in her TSF talk about Anderson in September this year. But at the time, we hadn't identified the singer and we didn't know the circumstances of the recording either. Both these songs and John Peel are songs clearly identified with this particular region, whilst the 4th, All Jolly Fellows, was a song with widespread appeal, conjuring up a bucolic vignette which could be from any part of rural England. I'll just say at this point that I have researched all the singers from each location, but there isn't time today to talk about them all, so we're going to move on and look at programme 2. This was broadcast 4 weeks later on the 4th of May, also from the north of England, this time from the King's Arms in the small village of Redmire in the Yorkshire Dales. Here are farmers, farm labourers, shepherds, the village blacksmith and the one-armed keeper from Bolton Castle, which stands on the hillside above the pub. Under the vigorous conductorship of Joe Alderson, the landlord, this congenial company loves to spend an evening in uproarious song. Few of them have ever been trained in singing, but you will probably all agree that their rendering of typical North Country songs rivals any professional choir in enthusiasm, says the Radio Times. For this programme, not only are there recordings in the British Library, but the visit of the BBC is itself well documented in local newspapers and is still remembered today by the village's oldest inhabitants. Interestingly, much of the singing here was of a choral nature, with a small group of men singing in parts, about which producer Maurice Brown commented, "I think it's the best natural singing I've ever heard, except the Welsh. It's in no way typical pub singing. They take great trouble with what they call blending." Aside from the group singing led by landlord Joe Alderson, there were solo songs as well. From newspaper reports, we know that Ernest Heseltine, a regular customer at the pub for decades, contributed the song Rocking the Baby to Sleep, although the song wasn't actually broadcast. Two of the performers listed in the Radio Times are actually identified on the BBC discs in the British Library, Jim Lambert and Kit Jones. Jim Lambert lived in the centre of the village, worked in Redmire Quarry and sang Our Old Nan's a Mazer, a dialect song perhaps more usually associated with Tyneside. As for Kit Jones, well, not only is there a photo of Kit Jones in the King's Arms, but it's a photo taken on the occasion that the BBC made this recording, and I'm indebted to Bob Ellis and the Dales Countryside Museum for this lovely photograph here. Kit Jones is a concertina player in the picture. He'd been a pub landlord himself, although by 1939 he'd retired and was living in a primitive cabin in nearby Preston-under-Scar, supplementing his pension by acting as an informal betting office. The man just visible over the top of his concertina is the landlord, Joe Alderson. On the Thirsty Work programme, Kit Jones sang I Like to Hear the Old Cock Crow, and newspaper articles indicate that he also sang Wensleydale and a song he referred to as Selina, which turns out to be a song made popular on the music hall by Lily Morris. There are local memories of him playing the concertina whilst out walking on the hills, and also of him entertaining children with a ventriloquism act. He seems to have had some knowledge of a mumming play and wrote a song called This Is the Christmas Time, which Peter Kennedy recorded from Tom Horner in 1959. In 1957, Kennedy had been to see Kit Jones himself, who was by then living in Darlington, and in his report to the BBC, Kennedy noted Jones as not suitable for recording. The other two songs which were chosen for the broadcast are both strongly identified with Yorkshire, The White Cockade, also known as A Summer's Morning, and On Ilkley Moor Bar Tat. Again, there were 4 songs, totaling just under 13 minutes. Now, thanks to Steve Garden, we can now listen to Joe Alderson singing The Summer's Morning in a recording made by Nigel and Mary Huddleston in 1960. They noted that this was sung as part of a custom called the Burning of the Bartle, held every August in nearby West Witton. Keep your fingers crossed.
One summer's morning, as I crossed o'er yon moors, I had no thoughts of listing, till a soldier did me cross. He kindly invited me to drink a flowing glass. He advanced
I hope you were all joining in at home. I started to and then realised I got my microphone on, so I stopped again. The village of Redmire seemed to have had a really lively traditional culture, which has really interested me. So there's more on my Unsung Histories website about the place. It's a fascinating place. I'm going to move on to the last programme. I'm going to come back to the others, don't worry. But although this may not make chronological sense, it makes geographical sense. This is from a village which I know one thing about, and that's I'm going to pronounce its name wrong. I asked 2 different Yorkshiremen how this is pronounced. I got 2 different answers, so I'm going to be wrong. But this is from a place, I think it's called Hereham. So I can hear all the Yorkshire people in the audience all saying, no, it's not, it's called something completely different. Anyway, it's in North Yorkshire. So I'm putting it here because it makes geographical sense, but also I know very little about these singers and nothing about any songs that were sung there. So it would have been a bit of a damp squib to finish on this one. This was broadcast on the 7th of March, 1941. An evening of popular and country singing. And the star, as you can see in this photograph here, is a very beautiful medieval thatched building, and it's now a famous gastropub. So I don't think there'd be too much singing in there these days. The master of ceremonies mentioned here, Tom Oldfield, was actually the pub landlord, having married into the Bradley family who had kept the star for at least 100 years previously. But apart from that, it's been really difficult to identify any of the other singers. There were 2 Robert Fords and 2 John Flintoffs living in the village at this time. And despite contacting relatives, neither of us have been able to establish which one it was that featured in the programme. Working from the 1939 register, none of the other names here were living in the village itself or even nearby. And it leads me to wonder if maybe they were shipped in from elsewhere or possibly in the forces stationed nearby. None of these names has turned up in any search of folksong archives either. So it's all a bit of a mystery, this one. We're now going to move on, go back into chronological order and move on to something that's very well documented. And this is the one that I found first when looking at these programmes, the Eel's Foot in Suffolk, which is not very far from where I'm located myself. This was broadcast on the 13th of May 1940, and just want you to remember that date for a minute, 13th of May. Again, the folk word wasn't used in the Radio Times description. It was an evening of local and popular songs. The Eel's Foot Inn had already been the subject of a standalone programme in 1939, Saturday Night at the Eel's Foot, where the producer had also been Maurice Brown. That programme had come about as a result of A.L. Lloyd paying a visit to his friend Leslie Morton, the Marxist historian who had settled a couple of miles away and had become an accepted part of the company of singers on a Saturday night. My husband John covered this story in some detail in a talk for the TSF last year called Good Order, which is also the title of the veteran CD that includes some of these recordings. So I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail today. But so far there is no sign of any actual recordings made in 1940 for this Thirsty Work programme, and it does seem quite possible that the BBC may actually have used the material that had been previously recorded in 1939 on the 13th of May, and that they broadcast it exactly 1 year later to the day. So in lieu of any information about the content of the 1940 programme itself, here are the songs from the relevant singers from 1939. We've got Poor Man's Heaven by Tom Goddard, The Foggy Dew by Douglas Mauling, Indian Lass and Pleasant and Delightful from Velvet Brightwell, Duckfoot Sue from Crutter Cook, and The Old Sow from Fred Ginger. The songs were mostly traditional songs, apart from Poor Man's Heaven, sung by Tom Goddard, which was written in New York as late as 1930, and you can see the 2 contrasting record labels there. The Old Sow, sung by Fred Ginger, was often thought of as a 20th century song, but actually it was composed over 100 years earlier, but it was popularised around 1928-1930 by Albert Richardson and Leslie Saroni's recordings. The singers at the Eel's Foot were all very local and were regulars in the pub, which held frequent sing-songs, often after a darts or quoits match. Here again there was a chairman, on this occasion Philip Lumpkin, who famously used a cribbage board to bang on the table and keep order when things got a bit rowdy, which they apparently did on these recordings as the BBC was footing the drinks bill. The ongoing fascination with the Eel's Foot from the left-wing intelligentsia continued through 1940, with a double-page spread of atmospheric images appearing in the photojournal Picture Post on the 14th of December. The caption to the large photograph reads, Folk singing as our forefathers knew it. Every singer in the room has had a turn. Now it's time, please. Round the table, hands are joined. Auld Lang Syne ends the evening. It's interesting to note that there are nearly as many women pictured as there are men, and that a young woman, Ethel Mauling, is shown singing on the top row. Now, Ethel was married to Douglas Mauling. He was a son of the landlady, Lily Mauling, who was married to Philip Lumpkin, the chairman of the singing sessions. Additionally, Fred Ginger was Velvet Brightwell's son-in-law, so this was really an extended family group with a few friends and neighbours. Moving on now to programme 4. In some ways, this next programme is potentially the most interesting as it's from an area little covered by collectors. It was broadcast on the 14th of June from recordings made in the Exeter Arms, Wakeley, Northamptonshire, not far from Oundle. From this evening of country singing, I've only been able to identify 4 of the 8 people, who were all from the small interlinked villages of Wakeley and Barradon. Wakeley itself is so small that in the 1939 register the houses are simply numbered with no road names or even house names, just number 3 Wakeley. And as with the Star Inn in Hereham, none of the singers mentioned here seem to have been collected, and no recordings are indicated anywhere in the archives. In fact, even the identity of the pub is slightly in question, as there had been a pub called the Exeter Arms in Wakeley, which closed at an unspecified date, and another pub in the contiguous village of Barradon took on the name Exeter Arms, again at an unspecified date. George White, who's listed as the chairman, is definitely the most interesting of the personnel that I have been able to identify. A commercial traveller in his day job, it seems he had a bit of a performing career too, as the small ads in the Boston Guardian from the 1940s reveal. George White, comedian, expert compere for concerts, etc., also MC socials and dances. I believe that White probably had a brief period as a manager of a travelling show in the 1920s, ending up in jail in Dublin, but I can't be 100% sure this is the same man. But perhaps he was a contact here, given his ambitions in the entertainment industry. George White and Bill Pridmore, a farm worker, were from Wakeley itself. Thomas Hendry lived about 5 miles away at Apethorpe. Bill Prodger was Welsh and had only been living locally for a few months. But for the remaining 4 participants listed in the Radio Times, including pianist Jim Hopkins, the nearest possibilities in every case were from Northampton, which is some 30 miles away. So for now, the singers and the songs in Wakeley remain an enigma. We're now going to move on to the last 2 programmes we're going to look at, both made in the Cotswolds, and they were linked by one participant who has proved quite interesting. Programme 5 was recorded in the Ivy in North Littleton, a few miles outside Evesham. This broadcast on 22nd of July 1940 was an evening of country and popular songs recorded in a Worcestershire inn. It hasn't moved. I've just realised, yeah, I think the county borders around there have moved a little bit, but anyway. Amongst the singers here, there are several relatives. Bill and George Knowledge were brothers. Frank Knowledge was George's son, and they all lived in one of the 3 Littleton villages. Sidney and Harry Gisborne were also brothers in their 40s, living near the pub. Wilson Ballard and Jack Brooks also lived in the village. I haven't been able to identify Dick Eames, and Charles Gardiner, the first on the list, we shall come to in a minute. There are no recordings from this radio programme, so we don't know what was sung on this occasion, but we do know of a couple of songs that were sung by other people in the village. James Madison Carpenter and Francis Collinson had both collected songs in Littleton. Carpenter's singer was Charles Rose, who was still alive when the Thirsty Work programme was recorded. He was in his 80s and still living in North Littleton. And on the screen you can see Carpenter's notation of Rose's words for the song Gaffy Gay, collected between 1929 and 1935. Collinson's singer was Miss M. Osborne, and this could have been either of 2 sisters from a pub-keeping family in the village. In 1941, Millie May Osborne was still living in North Littleton, where she was actually licensee of the other pub, the Blacksmith's Arms. And neither of these singers featured in the Thirsty Work programme, so what had attracted producer Maurice Brown to the Evesham area? Well, now things start to get very interesting, because the BBC itself had a special relationship with this area, and one of the participants in this programme had a special relationship with the BBC. Firstly, Maurice Brown, the producer, had actually lived in Evesham for a short while. In August 1939, the BBC Radio and Drama Features Department was evacuated from London to Wood Norton Hall in Evesham. The department moved up to Manchester again in November, so Brown probably wasn't in the town for more than a few months, but evidently long enough to come into contact with the last of our singers in this programme, Charles Gardiner, who, apart from being clerk to Evesham Rural District Council, was also an amateur writer of rural sketches for the radio. And some of those sketches featured other local singers that we're about to meet in the next programme. The programme 6 was broadcast on the 28th of November, consisted of an evening of popular and country singing from Ebrington, a village only 10 miles from Littleton, just outside the town of Chipping Campden. And here is Charles Gardiner again. This time he's the chairman of the session. Maurice Brown took the recording car to the Ebrington Arms, Ebrington, Chipping Campden, Gloucestershire a few weeks ago and made the recordings there for this programme. Many of the songs have never been recorded before, and most of them are drinking songs, noted the Radio Times. This village turns out to be a well-trodden location for folk collectors. When Cecil Sharp visited the area in 1909 collecting Morris dancers, he noted songs from several singers in Ebrington, including Charles Woodward, Albert Parnell and Thomas Caldecott. The latter had first come to the Folksong Society's attention in its earliest days. His song, We Shepherds Are the Best of Men, was published in English County Songs in 1892. Francis Collinson also collected a song, The Foolish Boy, from Garnet Kite, one of the Thirsty Work singers, who was actually from Chipping Campden itself. We don't know if Kite sang it for this programme, but I think it's a fair bet that Charles Gardiner, who was known to sing the Village Pump and Good Ale, would have led the company in those two chorus songs. We'll come back to George Hawkins, listed at the bottom there, after a small diversion. Garnet Kite, singer of The Foolish Boy, was a well-known coal dealer in Chipping Campden, and also part of a coterie of local men, including another Thirsty Work participant, Lionel Ellis, who were invited to take part in the previously mentioned radio sketches because of their Cotswold accent and dialect. The first of these regional dramas was The Campden Wonder in 1935, which was actually written by John Masefield, but followed soon after by the first of Charles Gardiner's numerous dialect sketches set in the fictional village of Upper Slocombe, an occasional series which ran until the mid-1950s. So you can see here some of the programmes that Gardiner wrote. Pump and Circumstance, a play about troubled waters, the fight that was waged in Upper Slocombe between those who wanted water supply by pipes and those who stood by the pump, an unofficial record of a deplorable episode, and similar text for some of the other things there. It's interesting. You do kind of wonder, if you lived in his village, whether you felt you were going to, if you stood up and said something in the parish council meeting, whether you were going to be featured in one of these sketches sooner or later. So Lionel Ellis, one of the people who took part in these plays, was a market gardener, and he danced for 30 years with Chipping Campden Morris, a side which can trace its history back several centuries. And I was lucky here because Morris dance historian Keith Chandler had interviewed Lionel Ellis in 1982. On that occasion, he did sing a verse of the Village Pump, but he said that he actually never considered himself a singer. Now, local newspapers are often good sources for finding out more about our singers, and the Tewkesbury Register came up trumps with some actual photographs too. In this one, taken outside the BBC Birmingham studios in 1949, three of the men on the right, Lionel Ellis, Garnet Kite and Charles Gardiner, are familiar names from this Thirsty Work programme. On the left are three men who were actually more widely known, as in the early 1950s, they went on to become actors in the long-running radio series The Archers for several decades. And two of them had graduated from Charles Gardiner's Upper Slocombe sketches to The Archers. Bill Payne on the left, who played the character of Ned Larkin in The Archers, and George Hart, who played Jethro Larkin. Bob Arnold, in the centre, played Tom Forrest, but had started his radio career singing jolly traditional songs in variety programmes. His last appearance in The Archers in December 1997 was actually singing a song in the fictional Bull Inn. He didn't appear in the Thirsty Work programme. I think he was actually stationed in Manchester during the war. I think otherwise he would have been on it. Lionel Ellis recounted how once the Archers got going, a decision had to be taken about whether to turn professional and join the Actors Union Equity or not. In his case, he was a market gardener with a burgeoning sideline in floral arrangements, and his business was just taking off at the time. The Upper Slocombe series petered out in the mid-1950s as the Archers took off. Now back to the participants in the Thirsty Work programme. We had George Hawkins on the song list there. And he was from Ebrington itself, where his singing was recorded. And again, it was Charles Gardiner who proved to be a link with him, as he'd produced a radio programme called Down on the Farm in April 1938, featuring George Shep Hawkins, who turned up in his traditional shepherd's smock for that recording in Evesham Town Hall. And there's Shep Hawkins not in his shepherd's smock, but being very active, winning a race at the age of 80. Bob Arnold, the Archer's actor, had worked closely with Charles Gardiner, and when Peter Kennedy recorded songs from him in 1952, amongst which was a song called The Penny Wage or The Little Black Horse, he commented that it had been Gardiner who had collected this song from Shep Hawkins. Hawkins, as well as being a shepherd, mole catcher and thatcher, was also a cricket and athlete, as you can see here. In 1957, Kennedy visited Shep Hawkins and recorded The Little Black Horse. So, with any luck, and I'm going to need a lot of luck, I aim to let you hear 3 verses of that song. It's the last 3 verses where he tells of his good fortune, having started off with just 1 penny in his pocket.
Whack falls the day, and I had in my pocket just 1 penny. One of these young men asked me if I'd play, and I immediately asked him what wages he lay. One says 5 guineas, the other 10 pounds. The wages was bet, but no money put down, singing whack fall the day. Whack fall the day, and I had in my pocket just 1 penny. I caught half the dice, and I gave them a fling, and it happened to be my good fortune to win. If they had a won, and I had have lost, I'd have to have sold my little black horse, singing whack fall the day. Whack fall the day, and I had in my pocket just 1 penny. I travelled all night until the next day, and I thought it was time to be jogging away. I asked the landlady what I had to pay. Come give me a kiss and go on your away, singing whack fall the day. Whack fall the day, and I had in my pocket just £10 free. £10 free.
So that brings to a close this whistle-stop tour of wartime pub singing. This particular project is still work in progress. I haven't yet been able to access the BBC Written Archives Centre because of the backlog due to COVID, but I know there is relevant material in their archives, and I've got an appointment there in a couple of weeks' time. Even without that information, there's so much more than I could squeeze into this presentation today. It has been really interesting. All these programmes indicate chorus singing and a chairman. So are we to conclude this is how all such sessions worked in the 1940s? Or does it reflect how the producer, from his earlier experiences in Eel's Foot perhaps, thought they should work, or would work best for radio purposes? Listeners to this series might have thought women took no part at all in this pub-based singing and music making. However, Ethel Mauling is known to have sung at the Eel's Foot on other occasions in this period. The Royal Oak in Ambleside was run by a woman, as was the other pub in North Littleton, where the landlady was herself a singer. There's growing evidence that women involved in the pub-keeping trade were accepted as singers and musicians. As I looked at the participants in these singing sessions, I was struck by how young some of them were. Most of the sessions had at least 1 man in their 20s, counterbalanced by, as you would expect, some in their 70s. Discounting Hereham, where there were such problems with identification, the average age across the series was 45. Having examined the wider work of the producer, Maurice Brown, a little bit more, it's clear that he was a crucial factor in the creation of this series. Maurice Brown was never far away from a folk song, but often far away from the piano and concert room. If he'd been recording these singers for records rather than radio programmes, he'd be far better known by the folk revival today, and I think his work deserves further study. In conclusion, the Radio Times Genome Archive has proved a great introduction to this series and provided information about singing locations and contexts that is not always in evidence in the collections of sound recordings. I'm still intrigued by the fact that the term folk song was never used in the descriptions of these programmes and songs, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing what extra information may come to light from the production notes in the BBC Written Archives Centre. And lastly, I'd be delighted if anyone else wants to take on an investigation into the singers in Wakeley in Northamptonshire or Hareham in North Yorkshire, where I haven't made much headway. Well, thank you for listening, and thank you to the TSF for this opportunity to share my researches with you.
Well, thank you, Katie. That was absolutely wonderful. Yet another brilliant talk. Thank you so much. Such a lot going on something that to begin with might look an unpromising seam, but in fact was so rich and a wonderful a bit of untangling that you've been doing to get to the bottom of some of these things. So absolutely fascinating. We do have time for questions. I know there have been quite a lot of comments coming up in the chat. So yes, I can see first of all, Marge, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask now.
Okay, yeah, I'm just curious. It's fascinating, the untangling that you have been able to do. I'm wondering if any of the singers or any of the participants in any of these pubs kept diaries or journals or notebooks, or if there were any written observations on performance practice and such.
That's a really good point, Marge. I haven't investigated that yet. I haven't been looking into this series for that long, actually, but it's another direction to look in. You're quite right. Thank you for that point.
Sure.
Thank you. Next we have Gwilym or Carol, who've got a hand raised. Good to see you.
Unmuting. There we go.
Yeah, unmuting.
Yes, yeah, really interesting stuff about Ebrington.
Excellent. Yeah.
Obviously, anything to do with Gloucestershire is a great interest to us. We've got information on the Glostrad website about George Hawkins, Thomas Caldecott, Albert Parnell, and Charles Woodward. But we would love to have any information, extra information that's there and pictures to add to the Glostrad website if Katie's happy with that.
I'm more than happy with that. You know, I'd like to share the Gloucestershire stuff to you, and the Yorkshire stuff is probably going to go to the Dales Countryside Museum as well, so it gets shared a bit wider. Yeah, you're very welcome to it.
Yes, it's worth knowing this information's in that archive because that isn't one that we've explored. So thank you.
Bob Arnold mentioned Charles Gardiner. Well, Katie knows this, but the rest of the audience might not know this. And anyway, Charles gave to Bob a copy of a piano arrangement of the song he called Ale, Good English Ale. And I recorded Bob singing that some years ago. And I don't know if Bob and Jackie Patton also recorded him singing it, but that was one of his party pieces, obviously. So there's a connection there.
Yeah, there's a nice a script in the Vaughan Williams Memorial Library, and I'm not sure. Again, I've got a bit of information to share with them because it was it's written by Charles Gardiner for him and Bob Arnold. It indicates which songs they were going to sing. It was a radio program broadcast in 1949, I think, about Alfred Williams. But I'm not sure the VWML actually knows it was a radio program, so I must remember to tell them that as well.
I think I've seen that script. It's in the Albino archive, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. I've got a copy of that. Yeah.
Excellent.
Right, thank you. Excellent talk.
Thank you.
Thank you both. And John Baxter, if you'd like to ask next.
I wondered, I found it as I was listening. I remembered a letter from Maurice Brown in the Listener. Have you looked in the Listener in the archives? There's a lovely letter from him in response to the daughter of Cecil Sharp, who was interviewed on another radio programme saying folk singing is dead. It's something people used to do in pubs. And Maurice Brown has written in and said, no, it's not. I've just recorded them all. I wondered if you'd seen that. It's a nice letter.
I haven't actually, no. Perhaps you'd send me the link to
yeah, I will do,
see that. Thank you. Yeah. And I think Maurice Brown is, he when you look at his recorded, when you look at the Radio Times to see what he worked on, some fascinating stuff, including he worked with John Seymour and Bob Roberts later in life as well. And one of the things that I happened to notice recently, one of those just little serendipity things you find was a recording of a group of Serbian people singing Christmas songs in Suffolk, totally random sort of a thing. But you know, he had quite a broad interest in music, but it was very definitely focused on traditional singing.
Good. Do we have any more questions about to pop up for Katie? No. So we've got to the place where, well, it remains to be said, certainly, Katie, that's absolutely wonderful. I really enjoyed that, as did for Mary's talk too. Both of them absolutely fascinating. And I was just thinking, it really shows what TSF is able to do, is bring people together, find, swapping of information, sharing that particular enthusiasm, the particular interest that both Katie and Mary have had. I'm sure they've enjoyed doing the research and finding out these things and meeting all sorts of interesting people. And we certainly get to enjoy hearing what they've found and knowing more. So thank you so much to both of you. Perhaps a little bit of an encouragement to other people who feel as if they might have things just they'd like to share with other people or explore a bit more. I know Steve is always willing to hear from you if you've got a subject you'd like to talk about. So absolutely brilliant, wonderful afternoon. Thank you both so much. I'm going to look at Martin and find out if there's anything else we need to say.
No, I think you've said it all. Better ask the same question of Steve.
Is there anything else we need to say, Steve, apart from we'd love to see you on the 12th of December, just before Christmas? And Steve isn't replying, so I assume that... oh, no.
No need, you're doing a wonderful job.
Well, I always think there must be something important I've forgotten, but there isn't. So
I want to know. So I want to know if Steve has got round numbers for all those hunting songs. JCB song. What's the round number, Steve?
Well, they'll probably be here.
I'll let you know.
Yeah, they'll be here by 6:30 this evening, no doubt. So thank you to everybody who's come. It's been great to see you all. We'll look forward to seeing you again, and a most particular thanks to Katie and Mary. That was wonderful. So we'll look forward to seeing you all on the 12th of December, or see you soon. Right, I think Martin will close off the meeting. Time to say a quick goodbye to everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Bye then. Enjoy your evening, afternoon, or whatever. Bye now.